I want to check this out because the amount of trouble happening with Call of Duty is just off the charts. The servers are just absolutely horrific. The cheating is off the charts, and this has just come out. This is like a couple of hours old, and this guy actually was a developer, so it'd be good to get his opinion on this.
Hey, it's up here. Wanted to jump in and start the year off fresh, talking about this new article that came out by the Information, and kind of what it reveals about Call of Duty's issues and why we have so many problems right now in Call
I know why there's so many problems. The servers are absolutely dog crap. They are terrible.
of Duty, from coming from the development side of things. And I think that I think this article really is, it has a lot of stuff that we that isn't really relevant, and a lot of stuff that's not news to us, but they do confirm some things. And there's one paragraph in particular that we're going to focus on, but it does it does share some information and confirm some things that I've been saying for quite a while now, that is without hesitation the root of most of the problems we're running into from the developers. So I want to get into this, and I want to go through it as briefly as I can. So here's the article. Microsoft's gaming business falls short despite Activision, by Aaron Holmes. I am going to point out that they do not mention, they don't name sources for some of this stuff, but it checks out against other information that we know. So I'm going to assume that they are correct. If they turn out not to be, then disregard this video. But they come in and they talk a lot about investors and how the game isn't going as well. Gaming and Microsoft gaming is not performing up to snuff, up to the way they want it. And
Yeah, it's not going at all well. Apparently, Microsoft has approached about 7 or 8 really, I think it's 7 or 9 actually, really big game publishers or manufacturer or creators, saying, "Come join us on here, and you can be part of it, and you begin the Xbox One Battle Game Pass." And they've all gone, "No, we don't want anything to do."
so, and then they talk kind of about what the goal of gaming is for Microsoft, right? It was according to the article, it was kind of a go bigger or quit gaming entirely. And so they went big. They bought Activision. They bought Bethesda. And in this paragraph right here, this is the key. Microsoft also hoped the Activision deal would attract game developers to rent its Azure cloud servers, but Activision wasn't using Azure prior to the deal, and it still rents servers from Google Cloud and Amazon Web Services while primarily relying on its own servers for development, according to someone with direct knowledge of the situation and another person briefed on it. So,
That's really, really bad, and it explains a lot. So when Activision devs are creating the game, they're creating the game on their own Activision servers, which will be really, really good. And they'll build this amazing game, and they'll do all these wonderful things, and everything will work perfectly. And then they have to adapt the game to go onto Amazon or Google, onto their servers, and they have to take into account and accommodate so many different things on each of the server platforms that it ends up just causing just horrendous things to happen in the game, because like they'll launch one thing, but it won't be compatible with that server, so it'll crash everything or cause problems elsewhere. Makes perfect sense why it's in such a bad state.
they are claiming two sources have confirmed this information. And this lines up with things we know. So in 2022, the CDL was moved from Twitch to YouTube. And in that movement, in that announcement, they actually mentioned that it was part of a bigger deal with Google, which also is around the time that servers started to go downhill. Now, initially, servers weren't terrible,
Mm.
but they started going.
See, that's really interesting. Now, if you're just carrying on as normal and everything's fine, so you're using the Amazon service, the AMS, and it's working really well, and you're paying for that service, and the contract comes to an end at the round about the same time that Microsoft go, "Hey, we want to buy you." You're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, great." And just like what they did with MW2, um, after Vanguard, what we're doing is, well, if we're getting bought, we want to squeeze as much Bobby Kodo was known as. We want to squeeze as every penny we can out of this to make it line the top end's pockets. So you cost cut, and that's what they did. They cost cut and went to a much cheaper service provider that might not be anywhere near as good as what they currently have, but it saves them a lot of money. So it'll save them millions by going to the Google servers. So they're like, well, yeah, we'll do that. And you know what? We'll sign it for 3 to 5 year deal because who cares? We're getting bought out. We'll be gone before the end of it. But it's their issue. So it could be so Microsoft buy it and then go, all right, you've got us on these absolutely horrifically bad servers. Great. What can we do now? And you're like, well, Activision is tied in. So until that contract runs out, stuck with them most probably.
Downhill partway through that year. And when you look at the calendar of events, um, what you end up with is around the time the server started to degrade, you had Microsoft step in and offer to purchase or attempt to purchase Activision. And so there's absolutely a correlation in my book
Mm.
between Microsoft's involvement and the services and the service quality that we experience with the servers falling off.
And don't forget, when they brought out MW2 was rumored, heavily rumored, to be a 2 year game. And MW3 was meant to be an expansion to the MW2. But the acquisition was taking longer. So, because what what Activision will have done is go, right, okay, we're getting bought out by Microsoft. We have to release a game, which you always do, but we don't want to put too much into it because obviously a game costs 3 to 600 million to produce. We don't want to put too much into it because we want to keep as much money for ourselves. So we'll just get everyone to do this one game, and then we'll do an expansion for the other year. So if we really need it, we can just add it on because Microsoft will have to take over, and they don't know what they're going to do when Microsoft takes over, depending on the sale. It took a lot longer for the sale to go through. So they went, well, the expansion, sorry, we'll just sell it as another one and we'll get more money in before Microsoft take ownership. And that's what they did.
Um, and so there's a variety of possible options for this. When we get into that, it will be pure speculation on my part, and I will be sure to be clear about this. But I want to talk a little bit more about the overall situation. So Activision is on Microsoft servers for the game itself, I believe.
One other thing, I actually know for a fact, because I've actually been told from an inside source who's quite high up at Xbox, that Microsoft bought Activision not for Call of Duty. They don't care. They bought it for the mobile player base because it's huge. They don't care about anything at Activision except for its mobile players. That's the only thing Microsoft cared about when they purchased it.
Absolutely for the CDL. I think most of their games are carried on Microsoft servers. I think there are some aspects carried on Amazon Web. And it's entirely possible that old games, 2019 era, Warzone 1, may have been completely on Activision, or I mean, not on Activision, on Amazon Web Services.
Yep.
And then they launched MW2 on Google services with the
Which ties in perfectly because MW2 was the game that was being developed and brought out at around the time, like I said, those talks had started. Interesting, isn't it?
expectation of fully integrating into the uh, Google Cloud services, um, which from a product standpoint is a little bit newer, but Amazon Web Services has been kind of a gold standard in hosted, in web hosting. for years. One of the companies that I worked for actually
Right. Okay. So when they're with Amazon, so when you, it's not a case of you just go to Amazon and say, right, we want to stream our game on your servers. What they do is there'll be like levels uh of service that you can get. So you could pay very little, and you'll get like uh 20 hertz server for your game. So if you've got like an online chess game, 20 hertz, way more than you need. Brilliant. Take 20 hertz, you have a very small outgoing for the accommodation of that server. If you've got a game like Fortnite, which has got a huge amount of data traveling back and forth between a very large player base or Battlefield, then you need a server that can accommodate that. So you'd like have a 128 hertz server. So that's when you're paying a much higher price for a 128 hertz server. Um, and I'll so that so say the 20 hertz server would be like a million pounds a year to hire or rent. If you went to the 128 hertz server, you'd be looking at spending 100 million for that. If you went to the 256 hertz server, you'd be looking at like 400 million a year to rent that. So they all have a different price. They're not just a case of one fee, 128 hertz server as standard. You have to pick your package. Obviously, Amazon, obviously, Activision like to pick quite a low package because they're cheap as hell. And when they got bought out, they've gone to Google because Google has said, "Look, we'll give you this super low tier bill. We'll charge you a really low amount, and we'll give you instead of like the third level tier, we'll give you the fourth level tier. You know, which is like 20 hertz for this, but 60 hertz for a multiplayer online game." And they'll be like, "Yeah, sure, we're saving hundreds of millions by doing that."
left. So this is where my experience comes in, because a company that I worked for actually left their own dedicated servers specifically for this reason, and migrate. And so I was part of the push to migrate the entire company over to AWS, including our development space. And so when I hear that they have development space separate from their gaming, from their hosting space, and they've actually got multiple hosters, which I think
Which is crazy, absolutely crazy, because it may no matter what you do, you could develop the game or you could develop updates that are so perfect that when you come to launch them on the server, if you've got one thing wrong, it just causes huge problems, and you have to go nuts trying to fix or find out what it is that you missed or didn't do or correctly set up to accommodate the new server. So on their own server, yeah, it'd be great. But when it comes to going live, that's when all the issues come around because they can't accommodate for everything. It would make way more sense for them to develop the game on the server that's live with all the other players to get it right, but they don't.
is probably going to be legacy products hosted on AWS, and current products, so Warzone, Black Ops 6, MW2, MW3, are going to be hosted on Google because of the timing of when the CDL moved. So we are actually looking at, when we say we can't turn.
And you got to think when they went over to Google, do you think Google went, right? We'll give you 80 hertz servers for the first year for MW2. Second year, we'll give you 60 hertz servers, MW3. Third year, we're gonna have to drop you down to 20 hertz servers or 20, 30 hertz servers for Warzone and like on that sort of thing, which would explain why now it's just crashed and the servers are so bad because for the last 3 years it's gone down, but we're not paying as much, which they could do. Unfortunately, the only people that know what they've got set up is Activision, and they ain't going to tell people.
The servers back on, they literally cannot, because they don't pay for those servers. Those servers are not functional anymore. They are not part of the system, if that's true. And I don't doubt that it is, based on what I'm reading here and what I've observed over the last few years. So the problem is, now you have Google servers, you have Amazon servers, and you have their private development servers. And so with that
Yeah, it's just a mess. I mean, it sounds like a mess, doesn't it? He's most probably right though.
That situation, when I worked at this company at a different company, and we had a similar problem, a similar situation, right? We ran into the same kind of problems that we run into right now in Warzone and Call of Duty, where um, they will release a patch, they'll release a fix, they'll fix something, the zombies fix with that 2 hit on that enemy, as a very recent example, where there's a mismatch between the development environment and the product environment, the live environment, the game that we play. And so when they develop in their own private development environments,
Mm,
they don't get they're not actually able to test it fully and completely. In most cases, the discrepancies are low. All right. So so for 95% of what they do, it doesn't have a problem. But however, there's going to be differences in architecture and differences in the way the servers perform because they're not.
this explains Vanguard being so bad. Actually, I I would disagree with that. I'd say Vanguard was so bad because Sledgehammer was so utterly crap, or are so incredibly bad at what they do. It was all down to them. Don't forget, MW3 wasn't made by Sledgehammer. Regardless of what they say, it wasn't made by the story was made by Sledgehammer, but the maps, the guns, everything like that had all been pre-made by Infinity Ward, ready to go as an expansion. So Infinity Ward made everything. They made all of MW2, they made all of MW3, and all that Sledgehammer to do was release everything as it went through the year for MW3. But they did have to then make the game, the actual playthrough game. That's the only thing they had to do.
Not the same. And what that means is that everything might work just great in development. However, when you push it, when it launches, all of a sudden you end up with these little discrepancies that break whatever it is you're launching, or they cause it to break something else. Sometimes, and we were more familiar with this in Warzone 1, they would bring a problem back that had been resolved prior to that. And so I think it's important to understand how this stuff works, right? When you look at when you read statements like this, I think a lot of people blow through it and they don't focus on this. However, the fact that they have separate services for their development and for their hosting is going to be a big source of problems, and I think a lot of issues that we've had with updates, with patches, with new features not working is because of this.
Yeah, and it's not going to get any better until they finalize everything onto one solid concrete setup. Then it's not going to work. And Microsoft have their own servers, and they're hoping that once Activision moved over, a lot of people would then move onto their servers because one of the biggest games in the world is on their servers, and it could prove to everyone in the world how amazing they are. But Activision are still not on the Microsoft servers. Been a year now, year and a bit, maybe 2 years nearly. Still not using the Microsoft servers because they most probably still have the Google contract that's still running. And that's kind of an issue. I mean, it's bad, and it most probably means it's going to make it harder for the anti cheat to work.
Like this discrepancy means that the developers cannot build one to one. They have to, in a lot of ways, take their best guess of
Yes.
what it's going to do in the live service environment, like when they ship the product. And if they are not correct, right? If they miss something or there's something going on that they're not ready for, or didn't anticipate, then we have this problem. And because you cannot test in the real environment until it goes live, they ship broken things. And so I think that
Mm.
is a problem with management at the highest levels of not consolidating. And then you have you obviously.
Yeah, the game's dying. It's absolutely dying. It's yeah. I mean, to be honest, would you? I remember years ago, I was with BT Internet. Absolutely horrific internet, and it was a top package. And I spent 6 months trying to get this internet to work, and it was just a nightmare. In the end, it was so bad that I removed all the electronics and put them in a box, and I got Virgin installed in the house. And I was paying for Virgin and BT at the same time, but I was using Virgin because it was so bad on BT, I literally couldn't do anything. So I actually took the hit of paying for two broadband services, and I still don't regret doing that. Maybe it's time that Microsoft go, you know what, this we need to do something about this. Actually, pull the finger out and go right, stick Activision onto the Microsoft servers, and we're going to get rid. We'll pay Google off, and we'll go onto Microsoft onto our own servers, and we'll just give it the best service it can.
They have Google, which is, and here's some speculation on my part. You have Google, which is a direct competitor to Microsoft, right? The whole point of this article is, or this paragraph says, Microsoft is hoping to draw people to use their Azure, whatever, use their hosting service, and the game is locked to Google. Well, Google's not going to advertise the quality of, it is not going to provide the same quality that they might provide to somebody who is they're going to be their long-term partner, because
No, I think that's completely wrong because there'll be a very complex contract in place that was set up when Activision went over to them, and just because now Microsoft has ownership, Google cannot just go, oh well, Microsoft got it, just knock them down to the crap server. They will not be able to do that. They could find themselves into such a big lawsuit, like a huge lawsuit for doing that, because you're not paying for services rendered, and Microsoft could absolutely do them for that. So there's no way Google would risk it. They wouldn't even think to do that. They most probably had a deal contract set up so that the services just degraded over time, or they went down layer by layer. But yeah, Google can't do that. So unfortunately, I think he's completely wrong on that.
I guarantee you, Microsoft is looking to move away from
Yeah, it'd be in the papers if Microsoft was suing Google for not for services not rendered. It'd be in the papers.
paying their competitor to host one of their marquee games. And so the problem is, in a situation like Activision moving the CDL and moving their assets to YouTube, right? Part of that conversation was probably going to be something along the lines of, if you pay for a tier 1 level hosting, right? You pay a low fee. And we will provide you as a courtesy the higher fee, the higher tier, maybe a tier 2 or tier 3 service. And then as a result, you end up with a split in service tiers, right? And so
I mean, there'll be something in the contracts when it was all set up, and it may be a case that now they're providing a super low uh, um, service to Activision, and they'll be saying to Microsoft, "Look, we can give you a much better service, but you need to pay us this much," and it'll be an insanely high amount because, as you said, Google doesn't like Microsoft. So the amount of money that Google will be trying to charge them will be so astronomical. Microsoft said, "Nah, sorry, we're not paying that," and that's how Google will get their own back. They can't refuse or lower the quality of service, but they can agree to the terms and conditions, and then if the services is to be lowered over time, and Microsoft's like, "No, we need this back," they'll be like, "Yeah, sure, but pay us what would have been Activision like 200 million for Microsoft. It could be like 600 million, if you see what I mean."
people who are familiar with buying their internet service, right? They oftentimes will have this, they'll see this, right? They'll pay for a certain speed, and they can see that exceeded sometimes. I've come across that. I know other people have, especially if you're buying, as part of a bundle, right? They a lot of times will allow more bandwidth to your connection than you are paying for. However, if you all of a sudden say, well, I am going to eventually move to your competitor and I work for your competitor now, you might see your service reduced to exactly what you're paying for, which I
No.
feel like matches what we've seen with the server quality in Call of Duty, especially since the switch to YouTube for the CDL. And so
No, I'm sorry, that's completely wrong. They can't do that. They would get screwed for doing that. But let me know what your thoughts are. I'm going to put the full video down below. Watch the rest of his content, but he's made some very good points. I just think the last bit is totally wrong. But let me know what you think.